Okay, so I'm Karen Jacobs, a member of Greening Australia's Thriving on Country Committee and owner of Indigenous Economic Solutions Proprietary Limited, where I bring my perspective as a traditional owner and specialist in cultural environmental management and heritage, combined with my background in horticulture. Today, I've got the pleasure of moderating this great important session for Greening Australia, the webinar today, exploring the National Reconciliation theme for 2022, Be Brave, Make Change. Before we begin, I would like to acknowledge all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples across this country and pay my respects to their elders and leaders past and present, and those that are emerging. On behalf of Greening Australia, I recognise the ongoing colonisation of Australia, causing the removal of people from country and disruption of cultural and spiritual connection, and the extreme intergenerational disadvantage, injustice and inequity experienced by Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. I also honour the strength and capabilities and adaptabilities, of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people in the face of such challenges, and celebrate their and our exceptional contributions to Australia. I am coming to you today from Whadjuk country and acknowledge our Whadjuk people of the Noongar Nation and also the traditional owners of this land. I also extend an acknowledgement and welcome to any Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander person and people joining us on this webinar today. We have guests dialing in from all around Australia, so I invite all of you to introduce yourselves in the chat box and acknowledge the country from where you are joining us. Please select the colon everyone, so the colon being the two little dots, everyone option when posting, so we can see all of your messages. And in this webinar, we will be unpacking the National Reconciliation Week 2022 theme, Be Brave, Make Change, and reflect on the responsibilities and roles we all have in building an equitable and sustainable future where all Australians thrive. To discuss this topic today, we have two special guests joining us, our panellists. Dr. Emma Lee, Associate Professor for Indigenous Leadership from Swinburne University of Technology from Northeast Tasmania. And I've already said to her that I'm a big fan of hers. And Milton Lawton, the Woorabinda Ranger Coordinator from Queensland. We will be running a Q&A with our panellists towards the end of the event. So I invite you to use the chat box to post any questions throughout the discussion, and we will get to you as many as possible in the last 15 minutes of this event. Before we dive into the topics with our panellists, I'd like to set the context for today's discussion. Last week, we commemorated two significant days, the National Sorry Day and the anniversary of the 1967 referendum, in which Australians overwhelmingly voted to amend the Constitution to include Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples in the census and to allow the Commonwealth to make laws for them or for us. Both of these days should hold a special place in every Australian's heart and mind as moments of recognition, truth-telling, hard-won progress and coming together, and of bravery. Reflecting on this year's theme for National Reconciliation Week highlights that there is still so much to learn from these days. We cannot make progress if we are too scared to confront our shared history, our differences, and our commonalities. Reconciliation is an unfinished business, one that requires ongoing commitment and action from all Australians to move forward, and not just during 1 week of the year. So today we have a yarn, we are going to have a yarn about being brave and make change. It's important to keep in mind that we've come a long way, but we have a long way to go. before we can truly live in an Australia where reconciliation, equality, and sustainability is our foundation. But for now, we are privileged to have Dr. Emma Lee and Milton Lawton joining us to talk and reflect on the topics of being brave and making change. So I'd like to introduce both Dr. Emma. Emma, can I call you Emma? Sorry for this scene. And Milton, thank you for joining us. So let's get straight into this conversation. I hope everybody is comfortable with their coffees back in their homes or in their office and will enjoy the discussion that we're about to have. On opening, question to you both, what does reconciliation mean to you? And what do you think it means to Australia? So this year for National Reconciliation Week, Reconciliation Australia are asking everyone to make change, beginning with brave actions in their daily lives, where their life, work, play and socialise. So Emma, shall I get you to open?
Oh, thank you, dearest Karen. And, hello to all my new dear brothers and sisters, cousins that I see. There's a big mob here today. And for me, this is what reconciliation is about. It's about recognition. I believe that to be able to see each other as brothers and sisters within our frames of kinship is to begin to develop up an understanding of what reciprocity means. And when we are reciprocal with country, we develop up these incredible and extraordinary relationships. For me, reconciliation is, I don't like that term, reconciliation, because particularly as an Aboriginal Tasmanian person, I don't feel that I've got anything to reconcile for. But I do believe in the absolute necessity of building good relationships between Indigenous and other Australians.
Fantastic. Milton.
Well, reconciliation. For you, Emma, I have a different word for reconciliation. It's yunthala. Yunthala means as one in the one place, as one with each other and as one with our mother, the land. It's a spiritual connection between all living things and Mother Earth. So I view reconciliation from that perspective. My philosophy is be all-inclusive, let people exclude themselves. We see some examples of yunthala in this country from time to time. I can think of one example where there's partial yunthala there, which is Anzac Day. This country seems to come together to celebrate the sacrifices made by Australians during the wars. So I see that as an opportunity for us to build on something like that. But that's what reconciliation means to me. It's about being as one in the one place, yeah? And we have a lot to offer, Aboriginal people. And I often say that, if Africa's the cradle of humanity, we're the birthplace. And our people walked out of this country many, many years ago. And the last 200 years, our brothers and sisters have been coming home. And I treat them as brothers and sisters. And I guess we have an obligation to share the wonderful spirit that pervades this country with the rest of Australia, so they get a bit of an understanding of why we sometimes behave and talk the way we talk that doesn't always sit with our society's expectations. So to me, reconciliation is about yunthala, and it means it's a very powerful word for us. It's a big part of my life, and I try to do a little bit every day. But I see examples of reconciliation around my country up here regularly, particularly with the grey nomads, yeah.
Great. So, Milton, was that yunthala?
Yeah.
So what kind of actions around yunthala come to mind when you have seen occur, or what you have seen occur at a local level over the years, for example, in Woorabinda?
Well, look, in its simplest terms, it's like when you celebrate a birthday. Everyone in that room is focusing on that birthday cake and that individual. So it's a moment when we've all got our focus on one thing. So you see it at that sort of thing, and you see it at a greater level too. I have conversations with a lot of people around the Carnarvon Gorges area where I spend a lot of time, and I think the grey nomads are probably doing more for reconciliation in this country than any government initiative. They're moving around and they're visiting people like myself and other Aboriginal people across the country, and they're carrying their stories and the spirit from place to place. And hopefully they take it back with their dining room tables and share those stories with their own families, so they get a better understanding of our people and our people's ways. So if they're spending their children's inheritance, I say, good on you, keep going. It's a wonderful legacy. Yeah, so yeah, I see the grey nomads are major contributors to reconciliation. And I have a conversation with those people, and I'm heartened by the change that's come over this country in the last 20 years, yeah. I used to have fears, even about bringing children into this world, but my old people took that away from me. And I'm really happy with how things are going, particularly with the generations that are coming through, and you listen to their conversations. That's exciting for me, the 19 and 20-year-olds that are bringing the change. And, 20 years down the track, they'll be the decision makers, and hopefully they'll carry these values and these ideologies through to the point where they do become decision makers in this country and bring that change that's we've been praying for a long, long time. But it's coming, I think, yeah. I'm comfortable at the moment, yeah.
It is definitely coming, and there has certainly been some changes, and quite a few changes that I've seen over the last 20 to 15 years. So you're very right. It's everyone has a role to play in this. But if we go back to Emma, given your background in building and improving relationships between Aboriginal Australians and Aboriginal Tasmanians and the Tasmanian government, can you tell us about your experience and lessons learnt from progressing reconciliation at an institutional or organisational level?
Thank you. Yeah, it's really interesting. 2016, I was a key architect in helping to bring about a whole of government strategy called Reset the Relationship. So this included expanding out the definitions of eligibility to have more and more Aboriginal people to have access to government programs, more opportunities for joint management, focus in on Aboriginal people in education, and constitutional recognition for the state of Tasmania. I mean, we actually made that happen in 23 months, from raising the idea through parliamentary inquiry, bill reading, to the governor signing off on the royal assent. And so most people don't know about this because it came out of a place of working together. There was no controversy about this. It was about other Tasmanians finding their place in relation to us as traditional owners. But that came from a place of love and welcome, kinship and reciprocity. How do other Tasmanians connect to country? They want to have a language. They want to belong. It's not just being a visitor. This is home for people. And so at an institutional level, what's quite interesting is that good people are concerned and confused over the boundaries of who gets to do that work. And so I make it quite simple. Let white fella do white fella work and let us do black fella work. I don't need that mob to be doing my work. Right? And so this is where we find the struggle and the fumble and the, falling down, because it's not clear, those roles. And so it's like, I'm not a policy expert, but I will trust you to go ahead and do that policy work that allows the spaces for me to be able to say, what is good policy for us mob? And so being able to raise it up so that everyone has clear lines of responsibility made it really easy to define what that relationship looks like.
That's fabulous. And I always believe that decisions, so even though it's an all of community or all of Australia's role to make these changes, it often has to come from a very high level. And that's what you've just been talking about. So thank you for that, Emma. Now, Milton, people are often so scared of getting reconciliation or going into reconciliation engagement with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and getting it wrong. That they don't do anything at all, So how can we move past this mindset as an individual and focus on taking action?
Oh, well, look, one of the things that we're doing is up this way here is, you know, Emma talked about the roles that white fellas play in our lives. And, you know, since white men first came here, our lives have been pretty much controlled. And they've taken responsibilities away from us in a lot of areas, particularly looking after country. So, you know, we're masters of this stuff. It's in our DNA. We're born with this in our blood. So I use those types of conversations to say to policymakers and to government people, hey, we're here. We're masters when it comes to caring for the land. You guys have this responsibility. I think it's time you divested some of those responsibilities back to us. So, like, an example is the relationship we're developing with Queensland Fire and Emergency Services up here. And fire is such a huge part. It's really the only tool we need to look after country. But the country's sick and it's going to take a lot of work to get it back. So we've formed a relationship with Queensland Fire along the lines of, come walk with us. We will teach you our ways of looking after country with fire. And I think that's one way that we can start bringing change in that area. So I'm big on saying to the decision makers, you know, pass some of these responsibilities back to us. And we won't let you down. We've had 40, 50,000 years of practice and we haven't lost it. And I disagree with this concept that people think that Aboriginal people have lost their culture. We haven't. The environment's still there. And that's where the keys are. And we need to take our people back to country. And we do that here in the community of Woorabinda through our science curriculum down at school where we run bush classes. It's such an amazing thing to see these little ones start to understand what spirit is and how every living thing out there has a spirit, not just living things. So that's my contribution, is to trying to convince these people that, hey, we can carry these responsibilities. We've done it before you guys come here. You can pass some of these things back to us. And I think through those processes, that's when we will start to see some real strong relationships building between people, particularly here in central Queensland, where I'm in a rural community, and it hasn't been easy in my journey in life. But I've made quite a bit of effort to touch base with some of the landholders that my grandfathers and grandmothers worked for and had associations with. Never talked about native title, just talked about the stories that my grandmothers and grandfathers shared with me about their time with those families and vice versa. And these were wonderful conversations. And I just think there's, I don't know, people are just a little bit reluctant to take that first step, non-Indigenous people, but I say to them, just come and join us. Have a deep sense of belonging. That's the key. You must have a sense of belonging when you go into country. And I think through our people, we can provide that opportunity for non-Indigenous Australians to have a sense of belonging, to understand this country through our eyes and our journey and the history that's such huge to us. So, yeah, that's where I come from in terms of trying
And you're so right, Milton, because I tend to find that working on country, people get very nervous about engaging with Aboriginal people and what kind of a commitment they're going to make themselves or what is going to be expected of them until they're right involved in a project and turn around and say, this actually all makes sense. We should have been doing this a long time ago. What has taken us so long to look at things through a different lens, through a cultural lens, where Aboriginal people have been the custodians of country and the perfect conservationists and environmentalists or environmental managers for many, many thousands of years. And our practice is practical in its action. So, no, thank you for that. I'm right with you on that, my brother.
I just think that these easiest pathways to closing the gap. You close the gap between our people and those places where we need to go to nourish our spirit. I think you'll see our contributions to things like the health burden of this country disintegrate within a couple of generations. It's as simple as that. The rite of passage, I mean, that's a law I think that's been in existence for some 600 years over in Britain. They give us native title. I really don't have any involvement in native title. I've been excluded through that process simply because I have a different opinion on things. And my story doesn't always sit comfortable with some people. But anyway, it is what it is. And
Oh, that's a whole nother story, our role as Aboriginal people within the native title process. But look, Emma, I'm going to go to you with this next question. So what about at an organisation level? What can this look like? What does it mean for an organisation to be brave when it comes to reconciliation?
It's a tough one, because obviously within an organisation you have people at different levels of knowledge and comfort. And so I think, in the work that, well, at the moment I'm working with the Tasmanian Government Department, Marine Resources, and every fortnight for half an hour I have Auntie Emma's Yarn Up Porch, where I talk about, what is colonisation? What are the structures? What are we doing here? How are we going to make this work? And we look at vulnerability as a strength in learning together and not recorded lessons. And so this is the thing. Good people feel a sense of shame because they don't know. And so from an organisation, there needs to be leadership that says, no matter what your skill level, no matter what your relationship level with our peoples, and these are difficult things, you can't just magic up a partnership out of nothing. How to give a confidence to people to be able to manage that balance between going into communities and saying, oh, I know nothing, as a badge of honour, and then putting the cultural load back onto us to explain everything. But then having people being able to do a little bit of work to be able to then take that into communities and say, Auntie, Uncle, I've read this. Does this make sense to you? Would it work here, or is that from someone else's perspective, So it's about the confidence and how we frame up those beginning relationships at an organisational level is what I'm interested in. I don't want to direct people on what is a prescribed or list of things that they should be doing. I want to be able to give to people from an organisational level an understanding of what cultural modesty and cultural humility is in approaching our peoples to develop up a relationship. And that's quite different. That's about emotional well-being, which is very hard to put a set of characteristics to, because it's up to each individual. But I don't believe that people should be forced into this. If it's outside of your comfort zone and you've got to sit there and listen, that's a good thing too, because that's our culture. As a young person, I don't have the right to have a say. I'm there to listen to my elders. And so we forget about the role of deeply listening. And so I just say to people, be bold in where your comfort levels are at, and be bold in asking the questions of how do I make a situation culturally safe to engage in it? And if your bosses don't know, it's up to them to find out, right? And find those mob who are willing to share in that leadership work with them.
No, it's fantastic, because there is no one person knows everything. So by posing questions, it forces people to go researching. And if there's no data sitting there on a screen somewhere to help you, there is always a local Aboriginal organisation not too far away that can provide a helping hand or to redirect you to the correct traditional owners for you to have that conversation with. So Emma, in Greening Australia's recent white paper, you are quoted saying, colonisation for us is an impact that presents us engaging in these discussions around climate change and resilience. So can you speak to us a bit more about reconciliation goes hand in hand with tackling other complex challenges such as climate change and biodiversity loss?
It's a really strange
big
thing.
question.
It almost feels like every day I'm in rooms full of people who are responding well to good relationship building. And we'll talk about decolonising or restorative justice. And And I've been talked over through and around. I've sat in a room full of 40 people talking about Indigenous knowledge, and not once asking me what I might think about this. And it's like, well, this is anyway. It's colonisation is a terrible thing because it is a structure. It is not an event. It is a structure that gives privilege to white fellas to speak about their forms of Western knowledge, because all of us have been taught at school. This is the structure of colonisation in education, that if you are engaging with Indigenous ways of knowing, being, speaking, doing, you're wrong, because Indigenous peoples are wrong. This is what colonisation teaches us. We're wrong, we're strange, we're wrong, we're all kinds of deviant. And so as soon as you start speaking or listening to the way how we're communicating, connecting up with country, you're considered wrong as a white fella. And so this is what happens. This comes out at the other end of it, where in trying to repair that damage, I can sit in a room full of white fellas talking about this and never actually be spoken to. And this is what colonisation does. I have a definition about decolonising work. In its theoretical form, in its true proper form, this is about the return of land and power back to Indigenous peoples. But for me, decolonising is having the opportunity to grieve together for the knowledges we've both been denied, both as Aboriginal people being denied our culture and connection, and for white fellas having this as well. And so colonisation excludes us from sitting around the table, even when we're there, present, from speaking in honesty, a truth, a perspective that may or may not align with what we assume is to be authentic and legitimate Aboriginality. Comes in all shapes and sizes. But colonisation teaches us that certainty must be a given. And as Aboriginal people, we work in uncertainty all the time. That's why we have our ancestor law. That's why we have our elders to mediate that for us. Uncertainty is a characteristic of who we are and what we do. And so this is part of colonisation for white fellas. They're not allowed to be uncertain. They're not allowed to deeply reflect. They're not allowed to be silent. Colonisation teaches them that all of us, that you have the right to have a say. And colonisation never, ever is about the right to listen. And so as Aboriginal people sitting around that table, we have to listen to other people. And so what I think is being brave and making change is to shut up and let black fellas speak.
That's a very brave move for non-Aboriginal people to do. I kind of, and it's amusing sometimes to me. I often sit around a board table because I actually sit on 12 boards. So I often hear people discussing and looking at the plans and strategies that are to bring about a better world for Aboriginal people. And often you're right. We're literally the last person around the table to be asked. And I think sometimes it comes down to, I'm referring to it recently as being conditioned. It's how we've been conditioned to just sit there and be quiet, or non-Aboriginal people to think that they've been conditioned to think that they know better in some cases. And I'm not being offensive to everybody or anyone in particular, but that's kind of the attitude or the feeling that we get as Aboriginal people sometimes sitting around the table. So I'm all about being brave and breaking that conditional habits, those conditional habits that have been placed on us to accept what has been presented to us instead of listening to us as Aboriginal people.
Absolutely, Arnie, because this is feeds in. I want to take away the anxiety that white fellas have to always have something to say. I want them to be, connection to country, and Uncle probably know this one. It's about silence. It's about listening. It's about feeling. And so I feel deeply sympathetic and sorrowful that white fellas have been told that they have to have an opinion, that they've got to cover off on a gap, can't be silenced. And so how are they meant to learn connection on a very body, visceral level? This is what I think Uncle's been getting at, eh?
Yeah, I think it's all about listening to our spirit. What does our spirit of our environment, our people, our culture, what does it bring? And you're not going to learn that unless you actually have that pure engagement with us and actually listen to what Aboriginal people are truly saying from their heart. So, Milton, what kind of tangible change and benefits have projects that have reconciliation at the heart brought for your local community environment and your local economy?
Well, look, the very fact that we've got an Indigenous Rangers program happening now, which is a godsend to this community. We had 27 applicants for four positions that were advertised. And that's a real indication to the government and these decision makers that this is where our people want to be, looking after country, because that's about looking after ourselves and our spirit. And, you know, go back to what Emma was saying. We don't just want to be participants at the table. We want to create the dialogue. And I think it's time, that we'd be given that opportunity. And Australia's got to place some trust in us at some stage, that the decisions that we make in terms of where we're going as a race of people, that hey, it's all going to fit in well with the story that you guys are telling. You know, we're not going to be going off on our own. We for 200 years, we've had people come to this country, and it's important. And look, I look at it this way. I have an obligation as an Aboriginal person to ensure that every non-Indigenous person I come into contact has an understanding or some sort of understanding of how to tap into the spirit. And like I mentioned before, that deep sense of belonging. It's so important. But I go back to not being just treated as participants at the table. Give us some recognition as creators of the dialogue and let us run with it. And you'll find that we are just more than a race of people. We're a gift to the world, in terms of what we carry for the last 40 or 60,000 years. And we've shown very little of that to the big wide world yet. And I think we're critical, and it's crucial that we be involved in this dialogue in regards to climate change, because we might just have some tools that will assist in addressing some of these issues that are impacting upon our lives and the future of our people, not only our people, but all Australians. So, that's what I believe that in my heart, that we are a gift. We are a gift to the world, and we haven't been tapped into yet. Even though we're the most researched race of people on the face of this earth. And they've recreated the big elder now, Uncle Google, You can't get it from us, Murray. You go to Uncle Google, he's bound to have something there for you too. Well, he is. He carries a lot of knowledge now, MRA, doesn't he? So we've got to give him some status, So I call him Uncle Google. And whenever I'm in a bit of dilemma and I can't get knowledge from my neighbouring people or within my own mob, I go to Uncle Google. There's something there for me that will give me the direction to find the answers I want. So that's where it sits for me.
That's so funny, Milton. I was actually in a teleconference yesterday with a couple of businessmen from London, and we were talking about the Woggle spirit, and they were asking me, what's this Woggle? What does it look like? And I said, look on Google, because that's universal. And that has a lot of explanation about the Woggle, and more than I can go into right now while I'm online with you. So it's so funny, because it is, if I'm looking up Noongar language, often I can't get a hold of one of my Aboriginal elders to query them on a particular use or a terminology. So let's go to Google and see what that says in Wikipedia or somewhere else in the definition about a particular purpose or location or a name. So that's really funny that you bring up Mr. Google, Brother Google. So Milton, what does embedding respect and understanding? So you've touched on this in your conversations into the way we think about and engage in relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people. How does that look for you?
Well, look, I'm married to a non-Indigenous person, I have been for 34 years. And for me to be accepted into that family, I went to the grandfather, because that's how it's done, isn't it? Relationships between grandparents and grandchildren are sacred, and no one should interfere with that. So for me to be accepted into that family, I went to the grandfather, and that just flowed out from there. And over the course of the last 35 years, I've been developing some really strong relationships with people in this family. And my wife, she's been so supportive of what we're doing. An example of how this stuff works, my wife is non-Indigenous, and my children's Yuri, their totem stopped with me because it comes down that female line. And because she was non-Indigenous, all she had was a crest or some sort of family crest or a tartan or something like that, because she's Irish also. So I said to my old people, I'm in a bit of a dilemma here. How do I fix this? And that was so simple. They asked me where she was born, and I told them. They said, well, she's born in the same water as your mother, so she can carry that totem. It comes down. Such a simple solution to a dilemma for me, but yeah, it's just about not being afraid to engage with us. You know, I've met people in their 30s and 40s that have never had a conversation with an Aboriginal person prior to me. I find that extraordinary in this day and age, that people still aren't engaging with their people in that way. Being bold, crikey. Greening Australia can take a bit of I'll have a bit of a shot at Greening Australia. I'm sorry, Greening Australia, but I read your Reconciliation Action Plan, and from what I understand, you have one Indigenous employee right across this country, yeah? And that gentleman who works here with us, and he's a family member, but he's done the most amazing job in supporting this community to get where we are today with our Rangers program, our Healthy Country Plan and stuff like that. So I'll say to Greening Australia, if you've got 4% target as your Indigenous employment rate there, maybe you want to think about 6.5%, yeah? The more of you get in there, the greater it's going to be, because we bring so much more than just our personalities and our skills. We have a spirit. We have a spirit that can just pervade any room and touch anyone at any time. And I think, you know, people just need to not be afraid to come up and have these conversations with us. No, I think it was touched on a bit earlier by Emma too. There's a change factor. There's a history there. Those dark events are history. People are trained to that, including our people. I refuse to chain myself to those things. It's not my burden to carry. A lot of the stuff was perpetrated against my mothers and grandmothers, not against me. So I don't have the right to carry that burden. So that's my philosophy on that. And I teach my children, my grandchildren, the same thing. You know, we're all equal on this planet, and we need a bit of yuntla going on. So, yeah.
Thank you, Milton. No, everybody and every organisation and every corporation has a role now to be brave and make change. So thank you. And Greening Australia is aware that the engagement, Aboriginal engagement internally is certainly something that must be improved upon.
I'm sure they're listening. My apologies.
So there's nothing like about putting an organisation on the stand. That's good. So Emma, what does embedding respect and understanding into the way we think about and engage in relationships with Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, do you look, or how does it look like for you?
Well, Uncle, I'm gonna be stealing Uncle Google, but I'll fair exchange.
Your uncle too.
Fair exchange that, you know, lately I've been saying, I am not your Blackopedia.
So Wikipedia has lost its name. We have a new name for Wikipedia. It's Blackopedia.
Right. That's the way to go. Let's just black it all.
Oh, man. You know, I mean, honestly, talk about, you know, I mean, if they had a black Who Wants to Be a Millionaire, you'd only need one fella, because, you know, if you're in the public gaze, you know everything across 60,000 years, across the continent, across, you know, communities, across health, politics. Oh, Lordy. There's that side of it, you know. Come to me, having done your research, you know, so we can have a discussion about what I may or may not know. You know, there's always that expectation that we're going to know, and sometimes we just don't. Like you say, I've got to go back to Uncle Google. But look, I think the biggest thing, and this is for me, about connecting the country, what I want to tell my little brothers and sisters that, you know, I'm saying here, and we've got a big mob of them here. There is a difference between being an activist and a warrior. And you know, I've been there, I've been young, I've waved the flag, I've had that pain, you know, of not being heard, that activism. And it's not healthy. You know, that activism was killing me, because I needed people to know And what I have learned is that activism, as I get older, I don't want other people to bear the burdens and the outrage of the conditions that we see and have to live through as Aboriginal people today. I don't want them to take that home with them. I don't want to make them feeling ill and sick over the hideousness of us, over incarceration, kids being taken out of home. I don't want them to feel that. I don't want to have to worry about what they're doing, being angry, because our culture is one of love. Love for country, yes, uncle. Love for our elders, love for our communities. And activism is so much about, and it's right to be angry, but being a warrior is sometimes the bravest move, because a warrior looks after themselves, because you can't make healthy decisions for healthy country if you are not healthy. And that's that connection to country. That's sitting there and listening and having that spiritualness just covered, just beautiful. And a warrior says, you know what, at the end of the day, I'm going to leave it at the door and I'm going to go home and appreciate my family. And a warrior says, you know, I may not be able to do much for you, uncle, but I can be here to listen. And a warrior says, you know, I may not have much power, but guess what? I have a privilege to ask a question. Maybe I don't change things, but maybe I set up a discussion about asking questions. How can I get involved in a reconciliation policy? We're Aboriginal people around this table. What does country, you know, think about this? And so warrior will have a mantra, you know, that I say, don't make a decision for me without me. And so, you know, it takes time. I've written in here, you can't change a government, can't fix 200 years of trauma and hurt out of colonisation and election cycle. And we can't rush this. We can be hasty in running to the goals of supporting our peoples, but we can't rush it, because in the end we're going to fall over and stuff it up, and then that makes it worse, and you know, your activism just burn out. Activists burn out, warriors shine bright.
That's right. And I think we all have different attributes, and our personality will lend us to our role in bringing about this change. So, and it is, you're so right. We need to very strongly, and it is essential for us to encourage people and organisations to go and move past simply, you know, doing the bare minimum, and to truly be brave and go beyond what is expected and make bold change. So no, that's very much the role that each individual plays. We do have those activists amongst us, and then we have those that are the decision makers that go straight to the top, and then we have those that the doers and the thinkers and the posers of questions. So, and everybody has their role to play. So for both, just before we wind up, I've got this last question before we go to a question and answer time. So to both of you, so with this in mind, do you have any final thoughts or parting words before we move to the audience and provide some responses to the questions that have been asked?
I'll go. I'm happy. Yes, I do.
Go for it, Milton. Yes.
The virtue of patience will serve you well if the wonderful secrets you expect her to tell. You ask your questions with your ears and eyes, and because she has no tongue, you can expect no lies. Being as one in the one place is the spirit of Yuntala and humanity's saving grace, yeah? And that wonderful virtue of patience, which is slowly dissipating in society today, Aboriginal people still have it in spades. And we need to hang on to that, because we've been waiting 200 years. And there was a time when we say, hey, you white fellows, wait for us. We're coming there. I think the turned around now. We're saying, we'll wait for things to catch up to us now. I just feel that this is how things are going at the moment. But that's it from me. Thank you, Karen.
Fantastic. And I strongly believe and support what you're saying as well, Milton. I think the context of what needs to be done is there, and it's really up to us to get involved and to change the content or the context of that conversation so that we're steering it voluntarily back towards understanding our engagement and what we see as our engagement within, well, basically all processes and procedures, isn't it? And Emma, what's your thoughts? So would you like me to state that question again?
Oh, I just, you know, I mean, wow, how do I follow that? You know, with Uncle, and here we go, Rhea saying about that beautiful poem, but, you know, just people being gentle on themselves. Because once again, colonisation is brutal, and it affects white fellas just as much as it does us, except we're probably a little bit more aware of how it affects us, you know. And so white fellas, you know, I always say this: if you love country, country loves you right back, and you were never lonely. And this loneliness scourge across Australia, I genuinely believe that if you get connected to country and you feel that, and you have a sense of gratitude and this ethic of sacredness about country, you're never going to be lonely. And just be gentle on yourself in this.
Beautiful. And I think they're wonderful words to just wrap up this discussion session with. And so unfortunately, and I'd like to thank Emma and Milton, but unfortunately that's all the time that we have in part of the questions for Emma and Milton. But I do have some questions from the audience and some discussion to go forth. So a question from Kate, and I'll probably target you, Emma, with this particular question. Do you foresee any major changes to reconciliation efforts with the recent changes of government following the election?
I have been answering some of these questions during.
I kind of figured you would be answering these questions already.
Of course I'm full of hope. Isn't it the most extraordinary thing that, you know, Indigenous Australians have been a centrepiece of mainstream government policy? It's beautiful, but I like to temper expectation, you know, I mean, manage expectations. This mob ain't going to fix 200 years worth of problems, you know, but they can make a headway to it, and my cup runneth over with, you know, optimism.
Beautiful. So we have another question from Karen. So Milton, I'm curious to hear from each of you, or from both of you actually, what voice treaty truth means to you when it comes to healing country and healing people. So Milton, would you like to go first with responding to Karen's question?
What does voice treaty and truth mean to me? Yeah, well, I guess I'm hopeful that these words will be used in a really constructive way and productive way by this country in the future. I think a treaty's, for me personally, I think it'd be great for us to have a treaty. And Western Parliament, I think these are all really great things, but there has to come from the people, our people, and not be appointed by other agencies or institutions. Our voice in Parliament is going to be really important. But as far as the truth that needs to be told, it's painful. It really is. It's painful for me. I'm forbidden to talk about those things that were perpetrated against my mothers and fathers. I do from time to time, only when I want to make a point on just how horrible it was for our women in particular. And we tell our stories about the women of Central Queensland and the hardship that they've gone through over the last 200 years. And it's a really horrible story, but it's also very uplifting. It's heartening. We're still here after all this stuff being perpetrated against us. We're still here, and we still have this amazing amount of love in our heart for this country. And I think sometimes people struggle with that. How can we be who we are after being treated the way we've been treated for so long? Well, you know what? We don't have a word for love in my language, yeah? I was saying, which means I carry you in my heart. That's how I tell my wife I love her. I don't have a word for love because it was all around us. Love for nature, everything, love for each other. And you know, we talked about roles there before. Well, let's think about this as a big family structure. And within that family structure, you have all these different roles. You know, on a family scale, you have your tool makers, your artists, your singers, your dancers, your medicine men, medicine women, all these different roles. And they had to be carried to the nth degree in order for that family, that structure to work, have yuntala. And this is what Australia needs. And that can only come from a bit of truth telling. I think it has to happen. It really has to happen because it hurts me. I can't talk about this without getting emotional. So therefore I don't go into that conversation. And I guess this would be, well, I'm probably being a little bit selfish in that way. It'd be helpful for me if I was being able to not feel reluctant to tell the story of these things that were perpetrated against my grandmothers and grandfathers. I'm really uncomfortable telling that at this point in time. My children, I don't have a problem with other people telling it, but sometimes I think to myself, you know what, this message gets across a lot louder and clear when a white fella's telling this story. Because, you know, as black fellas, we sometimes wear our heart on the sleeve a bit too much, yeah? And sometimes it's more of an impact when a white man talks about these horrible things that are perpetrated. And people sit up and listen, but when we talk about it, I just don't think they're listening hard enough, yeah? So for me, truth, treaty, everything, put it on the table. Let's get this discussion happening. I think the country's ready for this. I really do. And I'm certainly ready for it. I want to see some changes before I leave this planet, yeah? And I've got a few years left yet.
Thank you. Well, you're not going anywhere in a hurry, Milton. So Emma, the question was also posed to you. So again, from Karen. So she's curious to hear about, from each of you, you know, what voice, treaty and truth means to you when it comes to healing country and healing people.
I take a very different view about treaty, because no treaties ever worked across the world. You know, there's hundreds of them in America and they never worked. And it would be interesting to see how far we would talk about treaty if we took money, power off the table and returned it back into relationships of love, heart and country. You know, who's going to be engaged in negotiating that as the basis of our framework? And so I see treaty as very much some of it's a little bit of a colonial structure, this agreement making, this thing of certainty. And what we've seen in the past in Australia and things like native title, it's like, here you go, you've got yours, bugger off, right? And the relationship is flounders. It's, you know, because we're saying, well, hang on a moment, we never thought about this as a consequence. And what I worry about, and what colonisation does, is takes away our histories, 50,000, 60,000 plus thousand years of history here. How long are these agreements going to go for? Because, you know, in essence, we're only thinking maybe a couple of hundred years. I would like to think, you know, what would a treaty look like for 10,000 years? And I don't think that comes down to money or power. You know, this is about looking after country and looking after each other so that we're all healthy here. I think that the time frame around these things is important. Truth telling should never be rushed.
No, so true. Now, we do have another question from Nicole. Thank you, Nicole. So she is saying that her eyes have been opened with this amazing conversation. So she's there and, I should say I am here. So speaking in Nicole's words, I am here to be vulnerable and actively listening. So I can learn and be part of the change. So how does this make you feel, Emma and Milton? So Emma, if I start with you again, and we've got 5 minutes left for this session. So, and if anybody else has got some questions, or we might have time for one more question after their response. So thank you, Emma.
Yeah, isn't it lovely? Doesn't it take the pressure off to be vulnerable? You know, as a leader, we're always expected to have an answer, a plan, a strategy, a characteristic of confidence. You know, country Country doesn't need that kind of arrogance. Country needs us to be vulnerable. Country needs us to open up our hearts and our ears. Country needs us to reflect deeply on what our actions are and is it good for country. And so I encourage people to see vulnerability as an absolute strength in learning how to connect to country, to develop up reciprocity.
Thank you. And Milton?
The question again, Karen, I'm sorry.
Question again, that's all right. So it's from Nicole. So her eyes have been opened with this amazing conversation that we've been having. So I'm here to be vulnerable and actively listen so I can learn and be part of the change. How does that make you feel?
How does that make me feel?
Yes.
Look, I go along with what Dr. Emma said about
Emma.
About vulnerability. I constantly walk in fear when I'm on country.
Terrific. So this last, so I'll take you to the next question then, because this is a really interesting one, and this will be the last question for this session. And this is coming from Leah. Leah. I'm really interested to hear how you care for yourself and stay resilient throughout all of this, including how you connect to country to do this. So in order to maintain looking after self-care and maintaining your own resilience, how do you do this in connecting to country?
I go to a very special place that I call it my cathedral, I call it my university. That's where I go to nourish my spirit, and I do that regularly. And I go there and I have no plans, I have no structure of what I do there. I just go there and I just sit amongst my old people and just listen and take it in. And I have to do this regularly because things become so burdensome at times. And sometimes we pick up baggage that don't belong to us and we have to shed that baggage. So I go to country to do that. Look, I've spent probably 3.5 years of my entire life outside my water. I'm very uncomfortable leaving my water, the Fitzroy catchment. If I could put the Carnarvon Gorge in my pocket, I would travel because then I can nourish my spirit wherever I turn up. Yeah, like people do with the Bible and the Quran. They can pull it out of their bag or their pocket and they can sit there and they can nourish their spirit. But for me, it's site specific. I have to go to this place and for my healing and to just unburden. So I'm reluctant to even leave my water because if I'm not supported when I'm away from it, I'm of no benefit to anyone. And this is something that I've got to address down the track, but I tell you, I'm feeling really great physically and mentally and emotionally because I had the opportunity to go to my country, unlike a lot of our people who don't have access to these special places. And that's why I said before, if you close the gap between us and those special places where we need to go to nourish our spirit, you're going to see some of these problems disappear within a couple of generations. And it's as simple as that. It really is. Give us this opportunity to go and care for these spaces because other families use these spaces too, and we have to keep that spirit strong there. So I go to Carnarvon, I've been doing that for 35, 40 years of my life, and I go there just to do exactly that, just to unload and to reinvigorate, and I come back. I get punished on the way there. Oh yeah, I'm in pain. I've got to prepare for it. But the moment I get there, all the pain's gone, and then I come back and I'm ready to go again for another couple of weeks there. But it's regular contact.
Fantastic. Look, unfortunately, I'm going to have to stop our conversation there because we've just almost ran out of time. So look, thank you so much, Emma and Milton, for your time and sharing your insights with everybody today. And thanks to all of you who have joined our event today. I think we can all agree that we've been left with some phenomenal information and areas that need to be considered and a lot to think about. So in assisting each one of us in order to be brave and to bring about and make that change. But as an Aboriginal person working in the environmental sector, it's clear to me that we cannot have healthy people without having a healthy country.
Sure.
So a fundamental part of reconciliation is about alleviating and celebrating the leading roles that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples can and should and be playing in caring for country, our culture and our people. So as we close today's webinar, I urge every one of you to think about the role and your responsibilities too that you can play in achieving the unfinished business of reconciliation or conciliation in Australia. More often than not, it starts with changing, of course, what's up here, the psychology in how we think and how we behave. It's about considering and being considerate of where we fit in this interconnecting world and recognizing our own agency to create that change that must be brought about. So again, on behalf of Greening Australia, I'd like to thank our guests, both Emma and Milton, and thank you for joining us. And if you would like to provide any feedback on this event or to connect with a member of the Greening Australia team, please contact communications@greeningaustralia.org.au. And I'll just repeat that email again, communications@greeningaustralia.org.au. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.